King Herod, serial killer, genius, psychopath, or one of the greatest politicians of the ancient world? How did the man responsible for the massacre at Bethlehem accomplish so much? All that and more in today's episode of Understanding the Bible. Hey, what's up guys? Chaplain Cannon here again with Understanding the Bible Part 2. So today we're going to be discussing King Herod or Herod the Great. Now this guy is an incredible figure. He's one that is absolutely needed in understanding the Bible, and he's going to bring the Bible to life, to be quite honest with you. And the reason why we study this guy is because I want you to understand that Jesus didn't necessarily have it easy. And as we kind of say, you know, when you look at individuals, maybe you look at parents and how they raise children or how they've raised their family, you can kind of see how somebody that maybe has an alcohol problem or maybe has some kind of addiction problem, maybe even a violent character, that person will, oddly enough, his behavior will kind of be pushed down to his kids. Well, if you can imagine this guy right here, he did the same exact thing. And so one of the reasons why I really want you to focus on King Herod today is because his children brought about such a significance within the ministry and the life of Jesus Christ. His father even played a significant role in the life of Jesus Christ, to the point that King Herod actually was the individual that ordered the death of all the children in Bethlehem. So without further ado, let's get into King Herod. Now King Herod ruled from 37 BC all the way up to 4 BC. That is important because we need to understand the dates. Archaeology has proven that King Herod died around 4 BC. Why is that important? Because most of us will date or think that Jesus was actually born around the year 0 AD, or when BC and AD come together. But the simple reality is that King Herod died around 4 BC, and King Herod was attempting to kill Jesus when he was born around 4 BC. So how could this possibly happen? How could we have the dates totally wrong? Well, archaeology has kind of proven things to be a little bit different. Not that big of a deal. It's just a matter of understanding our history, understanding that we make mistakes and things kind of come to light later on as archaeology has proven. But a lot of people think that Herod was a genius. I would argue that he was a pretty smart individual. I don't know about on a genius level, but he was a very intelligent individual. I hate to say it, but you don't become a ruler of a country and you don't do the things that King Herod did without being a very intelligent man. A lot of people thought that he was a serial killer, and to be quite honest with you, he was a brutal man. Killed a lot of people, as we're going to go into, which makes this study very, very fascinating, to be quite honest with you. He was also a massive engineer. He did some incredible building projects that we're going to see here throughout this class. And a lot of people think he was a psycho. And here we're just going to read here in just a moment. You're going to see exactly why I say these particular things. Like I said, he was a genius, a psycho, a serial killer, an engineer, or was he all of them? And more to follow on that, but we're going to get into this right here. So it says right here, Herod the Great strove to bring Roman culture and architecture to Israel through ambitious building programs. And we're about to go into that. We're going to start seeing how he built the temple, the second temple, how he built Masada, how he built the port at Caesarea, and all these different things that are really unique, especially when you look at an engineering battalion that I'm in. And I've talked to a lot of the soldiers out here. You know, just being able to do these things by hand is pretty significant. To be able to do them without the heavy equipment that these guys got, it's pretty incredible, to be quite honest with you, especially when you think that they did it with buckets and just slavery. And I mean, I can imagine taking just one bucket after a time and building these things. It would take us probably a couple of years to build. These guys, just back-breaking work. If you think you're working hard now, if you can imagine what they kind of went through back then. He renovated the second temple to become so big and so massive that some people actually call it the third temple. That is not correct. It is not the third temple. It is the second temple, but it gives you the idea or the spectrum or the understanding of how large and how grandiose he built this thing. As a matter of fact, a lot of people say that this is one of the ancient wonders of the ancient world, because a lot of us don't necessarily understand how he did this. As a matter of fact, there's a documentary on Amazon Prime that I watched one day. In Benjamin Netanyahu, he was going through it, and it shows how they literally leveled Mount Moriah, and they built this massive retaining wall to hold the temple. And you can still see it today. As you see the Jews, they're on the Wailing Wall, they're praying right up there on the Temple Mount. And so it's very important, very significant. He was the evil king of Judea. We learned about that last class, exactly what Judea was. And that's important, understanding that the Galilee is a county, understanding that Judea is a county, and understanding that he was the evil king of Judea that killed all the children of Bethlehem. We're going to go into that in one of the classes here. He was the Roman puppet king of Judea, meaning that he was put in there by the Roman Empire. That's important to understand because he was half Jew, half Gentile, and therefore the Roman Empire kind of felt that he would be a perfect king to rule over the Jews. As we're going to see, he really wasn't the perfect king. He was a brutal man, but he got things done. Let's not lie here. Let's not under-exaggerate what he did. But what's unique here is that he actually killed his wife, had 3 of his own sons put to death. His brother only escaped by dying first. And I think that's really significant, especially when you look at Herod and just how brutal this particular individual was. And it gives you a really good idea of who this man was. But let's go ahead and read this right here. So it says, Herod became a paranoid tyrant. And let's stop right there for just a second because I like to discuss this in class. When you look at anybody that is a tyrant, that is a dictator, a lot of them do get paranoid. I mentioned Saddam Hussein on several occasions, or Adolf Hitler, even Joseph Stalin. Each one of these guys becomes so paranoid that it actually becomes their own demise. I believe Joseph Stalin, he got sick at one point in his life. He ended up dying alone because people were so scared of him because he was so paranoid about these different things that they felt like if they gave him the wrong medication or if he got angry at them that they would end up dying. Obviously a very paranoid individual. Saddam Hussein became very paranoid during his tenure. You see Kim Jong-un, Kim Jong-il of North Korea, they also become very paranoid. And you can imagine, I mean, they're ruling these countries with an iron fist. And if you go against them, people end up dying. Imagine your whole family might die. So of course they're going to be, they become paranoid because people don't like that. I mean, let's be honest with you. You don't like it when your whole family is dying, when women are being raped, when children are being hung. These are things that would make you paranoid. And so he was paranoid, probably rightfully so, but he was a little bit excessively paranoid. Maybe if he would just calm down a little bit, he wouldn't have to be so paranoid. But he became worried that he would lose his kingdom. The fortress that he built reflects this paranoia. We're going to go to the fortress, meaning the fortress at Masada. Like it says here, the fortress that he built reflected this paranoia as they provided refuge when he felt threatened. Josephus recorded Herod's execution of his 2 sons due to rumors of mutiny. He also sent his sons to this particular city, I think it's called Sebaste, a city not far from Caesarea, and he ordered them to be strangled. His own kids, because he thought his own kids were going after the throne. So as you can see, this man was extremely paranoid, and a lot of his building projects were due to this paranoia. Not necessarily because he wanted to build something for the people, but because he was scared, and he was trying to hide. And as a matter of fact, Augustus Caesar once said, "Gentlemen, it is better to be Herod's pig than to be his son," because he just tended to kill his own family, which is really interesting. We're going to get a little bit further into that, where he killed a lot more people. So next slide here, it says Herod married 10 women, fathered 15 children by those 10 different women. And according to Josephus, and we talked about Josephus last class, but just a little bit of a reminder, Josephus was a first century historian. He's one of the main reasons why we understand exactly what happened back in those days, why we have a detailed account of everything that happened back in those days. So if you ever get a chance, I highly recommend that you read some of Josephus's stuff, especially the War of the Jews. It actually reads just like a novel. It's actually really good reading, really good history, helps you understand exactly what the Jews were going through. Also, one of the reasons why we're going through this class right now is because we understand the history that Josephus wrote down. So like it says here, according to Josephus, Herod was so protective of his favorite wife, Mariamne I, that he instructed his soldiers to kill her if anything were to happen to him while traveling abroad. Now, if we stop right there for just a second, if you can imagine, a lot of us soldiers, we get scared, we get concerned that our spouses are going to cheat on us where we're on deployment. As you can see, just like it says in Ecclesiastes, there's nothing new under the sun. People have been concerned about this for centuries. Well, Herod, dealing with this in a different way, said that if anything happens, go ahead and just kill her. Just, it's done. But Herod's motives for marrying this young Hasmonean Jewess were partly to gain approval by the Jews. Along with her beauty, Mariamne I is said to have had a temper and a constitution to speak her mind. I don't know if you've ever met a couple like that. If you can imagine the two bouncing back and forth, it might have been an interesting couple to watch. But after Herod had both of Mariamne I's parents killed, so he had his in-laws killed, her arguments and the wishes of his sister caused him to have her tried and executed. This is his favorite wife, keep in mind. After her death, Herod was terribly distraught and became ill. Herod later ordered the execution of his two sons with Mariamne I, Alexander and Aristobulus, over suspicion that they were jockeying for his position as ruler of the kingdom. So not only does he have his in-laws killed, he has his sons killed, and then as a matter of fact, he feels bad about it later on. So, I mean, it's arguable. When you commit a crime or something like that, sometimes you do feel bad about these different things. But if you can imagine, your people, the nation of Israel, is being ruled by an individual like this. This is the world that Jesus Christ was born into. So I want you to understand this. Jesus wasn't born into this nice, cushy type world that was just shaped for his ministry. No. He walked into a world that was very fraught with death, dying, mass persecutions, tyrannical kings, a king that was killing his own wife, his in-laws, his kids, all kinds of different things. So it was a very interesting time for Jesus to actually come into the world. It kind of made it a little bit challenging, I would argue. So when you look at this, eventually the Hasmonean dynasty had gained control over Idumea. And we talked about how they did this revolt over Antiochus Epiphanes IV, when he had persecuted the Israelite people to the point that they had actually had a revolt on them. Well, this dynasty had actually finally gained control over the particular area of land, which is down south, as you can see right here. Alexander Jannaeus, I cannot pronounce that correctly, a Hasmonean king of Judea who ruled from 103 to 76 BC. That's the area that he was in charge of. He appointed Antipater as governor. Now what's interesting about that, in 39 BC, the Roman Senate appointed Herod the Great, who was the son of Antipater, as king of Judea. So you can kind of see the Roman Empire's influence in putting Herod the Great in charge right there. So it was more of a very influential decision. They were familiar with the family, they were familiar with the dynasty, and they kind of knew what was getting in there. So Herod the Great, he was called the Great not because he had wonderful character and he was a person of mercy, but rather he did many things that the world would consider great. Among his list of accomplishments are numerous fortresses, buildings, and cities that he erected, including rebuilding of the Great Temple in Jerusalem. And we're going to go over all that here in just a moment because this is what Herod the Great is known for. Like I said, he's not known for being this cuddly individual. No, he was known for being absolutely brutal, for killing people on the spot, for killing people for any type of disagreements, but at the same time, he was known for being an incredible engineer in building things that actually put Israel on the map. And we're going to discuss that here just a little bit further on down the road. But Herod's death was actually very, very eventful. As a matter of fact, he possibly died of syphilis, which some scholars tend to think. We were talking about this in the class that I previously taught just earlier today. That, as a matter of fact, one of the curses of the Egyptians was the fact that they actually died a lot from STDs. This is proven through archaeology. We see the diseases of the Egyptians that they had. And one of the commandments of God is to stick with one partner, which is kind of interesting. So it almost appears as if God's curse on individuals that try to be promiscuous is the disease of sexually transmitted diseases. And Herod would, obviously he died, because of exactly what I'm talking about right now. It's interesting here. So Herod determined that there would be an outpouring of grief at his death. He gathered the elite of the Jewish society together in the hippodrome of Jericho, closed the gates, and instructed his sister Salome to order the execution of the Jews at his death. This is something, oddly enough, that his kids repeated later on. And we're going to discuss that in a further class, but let's just say that this family was absolutely brutal. As a matter of fact, one of his own kids was so brutal that the Roman Empire took him out of power, and Pontius Pilate ends up taking over that particular territory because his son was so serial killer, psycho-minded type that the Roman Empire just couldn't handle him. They just said, this is ridiculous. So they took him out of power. But Herod the Great, obviously, he was exactly the same way. His sister Salome, she thought this death decree to kill all the Jewish elite, all the high priests, all these different individuals, these people of influence, she thought this was a little bit ridiculous. But let me kind of stop right there because I want you to understand why. So Herod was so brutal And he kind of realized that no one was going to be sad at the moment of his death. So what he ends up doing is he says, you know what, I'm going to make them sad in one way or another. So he decides that he's going to kill everybody at that moment in time, just to make people sad, so that at least they're sad for a reason. It's kind of a sick way to think about it. But Salome, oddly enough, she dismisses the soldiers just prior to the death, not willing to go through with the killing. I can imagine it was probably weighing very heavy on her conscience. And we're going to go into this video real quick because I want you to get a good understanding of Masada. So without further ado, please take just a moment, watch this video, and we'll get right into Masada here in just a moment.
I'm not scared, but my feet are sweaty.
That was fast.
Yeah, that was. Masada means a fortification, and that's exactly what it is. It's a fortification on top of a rock mountain plateau, an isolated one for that matter. And it is believed that after David had his meeting with King Saul in the caves of En-Gedi, and he cut part of his garment, that he came up here to walk after they departed from each other.
66 AD, the Jews began the Great Revolt, and this place, Masada, had become the refuge place for all the Jewish rebels who wanted to escape from Jerusalem and hide. According to Josephus Flavius, the Jews did not want to get captured and taken into captivity. So what did they do? They killed each other in turn until the last one who had to commit suicide. And they had this belief that death is preferable over a life of infamy.
Okay, so there was the video of Masada. Now here's a good picture of what Masada actually looks like. And as you saw in the video, this place is sitting right on top of a mountain. So if you can kind of imagine like how modern day movies kind of portray this, really significant. I mean, I can imagine it's a perfect place to put a fortress. It's a perfect place for King Herod to hide. I was reading a book, and as a matter of fact, I think I was watching a documentary how Cleopatra of Egypt, she actually couldn't stand Herod. She thought he was a pig because he was a Jew. She called him a pig on several occasions, and she wanted him dead. So he would often hide up here away from Cleopatra as he felt really paranoid that she was coming down to kill him. But as you can kind of take a look here, this Masada, like it said in the video, was used in the revolt around 66 AD by the Zealots and held until 73 AD until it was conquered eventually by Rome. And what's interesting is that Rome used to do this starve them out tactics. And what I encourage you to do after this is look up the siege of Jerusalem at 70 AD. This is the destruction of the temple. This is what the Roman soldiers did to the Jewish people. They literally starved them out of the city, and the Jewish people ended up resulting in cannibalism and all kinds of different horrifying things. It's actually, if you just read Deuteronomy 28, it actually talks about it in prophecy. That God actually said, if you don't follow my commandments, you don't follow my ways, this is exactly what's going to happen. So a lot of people tend to think that this is the siege of Jerusalem around 70 AD was the fulfillment of the prophecy as seen in Deuteronomy chapter 28. But instead of starving them out, the Romans decided to build an entire ramp going all the way up to Masada. And I can imagine, I was talking about this to some of my soldiers because I work in an engineer battalion. And they have a lot of heavy equipment that helps them build particular things. And I can imagine just building a ramp slowly but surely by using buckets, using hands, whatever it is, just dumping dirt, doing whatever they got to do to build that ramp up there. And I can imagine the Zealots just every single day looking down saying, hey guys, they're getting closer. They're getting closer. What are we going to do? And the Roman soldiers were absolutely brutal. They were experts in killing people. It says right here that, oddly enough, just like the video said, Josephus records all but 2 Jewish soldiers committed suicide rather than becoming slaves. And this is actually mentioned even in the siege of Jerusalem, where a woman was thinking about this. She actually looked at her child and she decided, you know, it's better that he die rather than become a slave of the Roman Empire. I won't go into the details of the brutality of how she killed her child, but let's just say it's kind of disgusting, to say the least. But David, right here, says David may have stopped here while fleeing from Saul in 1 Samuel chapter 22 and 24. That's kind of significant because they're kind of seeing the historical context of the area. It was a natural rock fortress on the western shore of the Dead Sea. If you don't understand exactly what the Dead Sea is, I highly recommend that you look into that as well. Just a quick little Google search will help you, but it is the lowest point on earth. It is a seabed that is actually filled with water, but it's actually a third of the way filled with salt, to the point that the water is so thick that you actually can't even sink, and as a matter of fact, it can't even sustain life because it's just too salty. But you see, if you just Google the Dead Sea tourist pictures, you got people that are sitting there floating. They can't actually sink into the water. As a matter of fact, there's people even just sitting up in there, just like sitting in a chair reading a newspaper. Kind of an interesting place. But like it says, this is a natural rock fortress on the western shore of the Dead Sea, and was used by Herod the Great as a safe retreat for his family in 40 BC. Herod rebuilt this to his liking, so it was probably used for quite a while, to be quite honest with you. But Herod built it to the kind of the specifications that this picture shows. And as you kind of look in there, I kind of go into a detailed view of what it looks like from a high vantage point. But it really looks kind of cool. And to be honest with you, I kind of think it looks like Star Wars, to be honest with you. It looks really kind of fascinating. It almost brings to mind as to what maybe George Lucas was thinking when he was thinking about some of the Star Wars films. So some of the building accomplishments that Herod the Great actually accomplished was what really put him on the map. Now when you look at this, we got the great seaport of Caesarea Maritima, however you pronounce it. I'm terrible with pronunciations. I am so sorry. I'm pretty sure there's a proper way to pronounce these things. I'm just not good at it. But if you can imagine, this is something that he did. This is what put Israel on the map. And if you look at how they used to trade and how they still trade in the major seaports. We got the major seaport at Baltimore and at Tampa and at Miami, and you got New York, and you got all these different seaports. And how we trade with the world, it kind of influences economies and brings about negotiations and trades and all kinds of different things that move the world's economy. This is what put Israel on the map. This is one of those moments in time. That's what makes this so significant, is the influence that Herod the Great had on Israel. Because prior to this, Israel was not seen like this. They were actually almost, I would say, they were on the lot lower of the totem pole. But Herod brings them in. He brings them up to speed along with the Roman Empire and really influences their way of life, not in a good and a bad way. So as you can kind of see, if you can imagine how the people of Israel were kind of back and forth. You know, here's this guy who's killing everybody, but at the same time, he's putting us on the map. He's giving us good money, good food, good everything. But at the same time, if you go against him, then God help you. So it's really tossed back and forth. But like it says, Caesarea, the port of Caesarea, kind of proves that this was the headquarters for the Roman forces because it was just so massive and just so big and just seemed to be absolutely impossible. And like I said, what I recommend that you guys do is take some time after this class and Google some of these things, because you'll be surprised as to what Herod the Great actually did. Here's another good picture of it. When it comes down to the port of Caesarea, What fascinates me is that they did this all by hand. They didn't necessarily have these gigantic cranes and stuff like that to do all this. They actually did this with very ancient technology. So I think this is really fascinating. This is what makes a lot of people think that he was a genius and a marvelous engineer, a good politician to say the least. But like I said, he was absolutely brutal. He knew how to get things done. He knew how to move it, but at the same time, God help you if you went against him. This is another picture of his winter palace at Jericho. I know you guys have heard of the story of that Joshua fought the Battle of Jericho and the walls came tumbling down. This is Jericho being rebuilt. This is his winter palace at Jericho. This is also one of the places that he would have gone to for a retreat, maybe to hide, maybe just to enjoy his time, stuff like that. But now we're going to get into something that is a little bit more significant when it comes down to understanding the Bible and why Herod was really considered so important to the Jewish people. Not just because he's a main character in the Bible, but because of what he did when it comes down to the temple. So why is the temple so important? And like I said, I just gave this class to a bunch of soldiers, and I want you to really understand this. The entirety of Judaism surrounds itself around the importance of the temple system, the sacrificial system, the tabernacle. As a matter of fact, these are the first instructions given to Moses when they came out of Egypt, out of slavery from Egypt. Told him to build a tabernacle, gave him all kinds of different laws, ceremonial laws. giving sacrifices for sins, all these different types of things. And the more you understand this, the more you can kind of grasp the temple system, the sacrificial system, the more you get to know about this, the more you will understand Christ, the more you will understand the purpose for Christ. You will understand why he had to die on the cross, why he was the final sacrifice for sins, why he is the scapegoat, why he is the high priest, why he is the king, why he is the Lamb of God, why he is the Lion of Judah. All these different terminologies and different names for Jesus Christ all center and revolve around the sacrificial system. So when it comes down to the temple, you're not talking about anything less important in the Jewish system. This is the utmost important when it comes down to them. As a matter of fact, there's an old institute in Israel right now called the Temple Institute that is focused entirely on building the third temple. And they've got everything. They've already got the blueprints for it. They've got all the decorations. They've got the menorah. They've got the table of showbread. They've got the altar of incense. Some even say they have the Ark of the Covenant that's hidden away. They've got everything they need for the moment in time that they can actually rebuild the third temple. And so what you're seeing here, you're seeing pictures of the temple. You're seeing pictures of the tabernacle. You're seeing pictures of an altar made of stone and of earth. These are all very significant memorabilia or moments to Jewish individuals, because they really focus their entire belief system around this. And like I said, the more you understand this, the more you understand about Christ and why he had to die on the cross. As a matter of fact, if you look in the book of Hebrews is an exegetical commentary on the sacrificial system, and it tells you exactly why Christ had to die, why he's the high priest, why everything, why he's the firstborn of creation, why his blood had to be shed, why he sprinkled his blood on the mercy seat of the Ark of the Covenant, why he entered into the temple in heaven, and why he sits down at the right hand of the Father. All these things are extremely important, but you'll never get the significance of this unless you understand the temple or unless you understand the sacrificial system. So I recommend and I highly encourage that you dive deep into this stuff, because you will grow in Christianity far more than you ever have, the more that you understand this. But if you look at this picture, the bottom picture here, you can kind of see the number of people that would have gone into this. And what's significant is look at the bottom picture here and look at the red that is at the bottom of the altar right there. The amount of blood that is being poured out right there. What's unique about this is that Josephus, the first century historian, records that in one Passover season they would sacrifice over 256,000 lambs. In a 7-day period. Let me say that one more time. In a 7-day period, 256,000 lambs. So if you can imagine, every Jew is required to go to Passover one time a year. It's a 7-day feast. All Jews would go there. As a matter of fact, when you look at the tithe system, the way that the Jewish nation would tithe, 10% would go to taxes, like to the Levites. And I have another class on that, so just bear with me here. 10% that goes into the Levites, 10% goes to their family for their annual pilgrimage to the Passover, and 3.3%, or 10% every 3 years, goes to orphans and widows. Well, that 10% that goes into your family went into that annual feast at the Passover. Now, if you can imagine, a city that is normally about 200 to 300,000 people swells to the size of about maybe 2 to 3 million. And each family would have a lamb for Passover to be sacrificed. So Josephus records 256,000 lambs being sacrificed in 1 week. And if you can imagine the priests right there, they're dealing with all the blood, they're getting everything going. It was an absolutely bloody system. And so you can kind of see why understanding the temple is so absolutely important, because especially when it comes down to Jesus. I want you to think about this. 256,000 lambs, Jesus dies on the cross, says that I am the final sacrifice, and all of this is over with. The entire temple system, 256,000 lambs, all these different things, it's now done with, because I have fulfilled the law. I am the final sacrifice. People would have thought Jesus was crazy. This was their entire way of life. This was their culture. This is how everything went. And Jesus is saying, look, guys, it's been prophesied for thousands of years that I'm going to come and I'm going to fulfill this. This is why he said, I came to fulfill the law, not to replace it. I came to fulfill the law. He is the fulfillment of the law, the fulfillment of the sacrificial system. So the more you understand this, the more you will get and grasp and see the reason why he had to die on the cross. You'll begin to understand your own sin as well, and you'll begin to fall in love with Jesus more and more every single day. But here's a good example of This was Solomon's temple. So if you look at this slide right here, the picture, this is Solomon's temple. And that's the first temple. Now you got the second temple. So you got the two different designs. The first one on the left, Solomon's temple. The one on the right is the Herod's temple that is redesigned. We're going to get into the size here in just a moment because it becomes very significant. But you can see Solomon's temple is found in 1 Kings and 2 Chronicles. Second temple, which was Zerubbabel's temple, had no description, but was found in Scripture in 1 Maccabees, 1 Esdras, and Sirach. But we don't consider those Scripture when it comes down to the Protestants or evangelical tradition. Catholics would consider that Scripture. I don't consider that Scripture. I think we went over that last video. But then we do consider the historical significance very, very important when it comes down to it. But you see the second temple here. Now what was unique is that the first temple and the second temple were actually built identical, but Herod renovated the second temple to the point that they actually thought it was the third temple. Now what's unique about this is that the Mishnah also describes the second temple. Now the Mishnah is a Jewish tradition. It's the oral tradition of written works, a body of spoken material passed on from generation to generation. Now some people have questioned that. Some people have said that can kind of be mixed up because it's oral tradition. You know, we played that game when we were kids, say something in somebody's ear, pass it around the room, and eventually we get back and it's an entirely different saying. But what we don't necessarily understand is the historical context that comes from that. Historically speaking, oral traditions were passed down word for word and they were never mistaken. Entirely different culture, different context. People would say these things on a daily basis, memorize them to perfection, to the point that they could not get them out of their head. That's very, very important. But these all talk about these different temples. So we do have historical significance and validation when it comes down to this. But what about the third temple? Herod adds to the second temple. Like I said, this is very important because a lot of people tend to think that this Herod's temple is the third temple, but that's just not the case. When it comes down to prophecy and eschatology, that actually plays a massive role. And the more you dive into that, which we will do one day, the more you will begin to understand why that is very, very, very significant. Here's a couple other pictures of exactly how the temples would have looked. Solomon's temple versus the temple of King Herod. Different design, absolutely massive when it comes down to King Herod's temple. But here's a point, is that the third temple has not yet been built. As a matter of fact, this is Ezekiel's temple. A lot of people have discussed this as well. So when you're talking about the Bible, there's actually 4 different temples. You got the first temple built by Solomon, second temple built by the Jewish nation, revamped by King Herod. Then you'll have the third temple, which is going to be built by the Jewish people to bring in the Messiah on the Temple Mount, the same place where we actually have the Dome of the Rock, where the Muslims have a mosque at this moment in time. But then we got this other temple that's described in Ezekiel. And some people have argued that this is going to be the temple, the third temple. I'm going to say it is not. And most scholars agree with me on that, that it is not the third temple. This is actually the Millennial Temple built by the Messiah when it comes down to the 1,000-year reign of Christ after the tribulation. So you have the 7-year tribulation. Jesus Christ comes, builds the final Millennial Temple that will sit there in Jerusalem and have Jesus Christ ruling and reigning from that moment on. And that's the whole point, is let me help you understand that, and because that's very, very significant when it comes down to eschatology or the study of end times, because a lot of people get very, very confused about that. But to give you a really good idea of what the temple was like, the size of the temple, I want you to take a look at this. So if you look at the bottom left, you look at Herod's temple on the Temple Mount, and it has a comparison side as American football field. So if you can see this, it is absolutely massive. I mean, the temple itself is larger than a football field. And then you got the entire Temple Mount. And like I said previously, they leveled Mount Moriah and they built a retaining wall to house this particular location. And if you go to like Google Maps or something like that, and you type in Dome of the Rock or Temple Mount in Israel, and it'll take you right to it, and you can see this place is huge. It is absolutely massive. It would have put Israel at the point in that location where everybody would have come. It made it the center of worship. It made it the center of economy. It made the center of everything. So Herod did incredible things when it comes down to this. And as you can see, you got all the different locations that are in the temple. And these, we'll get further into this as we get into a temple class. But these are just, I just wanted to kind of give you guys a good idea of the comparison when it comes down to the size. So here's a better comparison when it comes down to the size. You see Solomon's temple with the American football field, then you got Herod's temple. Herod's temple was absolutely huge, and it was incredibly designed, a lot bigger than the other one, and would have just, I can imagine you could see it for miles. It would have been absolutely incredible. So when it comes down to the Wailing Wall, I know you guys have seen pictures of President Trump. He had his hand up on a wall and he's praying on a wall, and you've got all these different presidents that do that. You've got all these different rabbis and they're praying back and forth on a wall, and they're asking God for redemption and all these different things. The retaining wall is actually, it's a part of the Wailing Wall, or the Western Wall, I apologize, Western Wall of the Temple Mount. And it would have, and it's been there for a couple thousand years. To be honest with you, and it's where the temple would have been. It's probably the last remaining piece of the area. It's the only place that the Jews can actually go to, so it's the only place that they're really allowed to go to. And so they block this off. The Jews go there, they pray to the Messiah, they ask for the temple to come back, and they do this all the time. As a matter of fact, they're doing it probably right now. And as we get into Luke chapter 1, and I believe this is going to be the last slide for this particular class, but as we get into Luke chapter 1, I want you to understand this. And when you look at the temple, because this is where the details really become important. So if you remember anything about this class, remember this particular part right here. So it says right here in Luke chapter 1, then an angel of the Lord appeared to him standing on the right side of the altar of incense. If you look at the picture on the left, you can kind of see the altar of incense. Just slightly to the left of it, you've got the Holy of Holies. You've got the veil that separates the Holy of Holies from the inner court. So you got the outer court where everybody was. You got the inner court where the priest would offer the sacrifices, and you got the Holy of Holies where the priest would only be able to offer sacrifices one time a year. Well, every single day, that priest would walk in and he would offer a sacrifice or light some incense on the altar of incense every single day. Well, the angels appears to Zechariah right there on the right-hand side of the altar of incense. And you can kind of see exactly through this illustration, through this picture, exactly where the angel would have actually been. Well, that's going to be it for today. Next week, we're going to go into the different Herods and the sons and start getting into talking to the Sanhedrin, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, and getting into different characters of the Bible. I hope you stick with me, and I hope you're learning something, because each week I want you to gain more and more knowledge of what the Bible is really talking about and kind of giving you good context as to what the Bible is teaching. And you're never going to get that unless you understand the details. So I hope that you're sticking with me. I know some of this may be a little bit thick and a little bit hard to digest, but stick with me. I promise things are going to begin to open up for you the more that you study. But God bless. I hope you guys have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.